This week, Transformers 1 finally arrives in theaters. So before you go to see it, get primed with this compilation episode of the basics, collecting and updating 4 past episodes covering the most important topics in all of Transformers history that form the basis of the movie's story. The leader of the Autobots, Optimus Prime, his arch-enemy, Megatron, and the story of how their fractured friendship led to the Transformers' homeworld of Cybertron being consumed by the Great War. So let's begin with the life story of the greatest Autobot of them all. The toy that would become the original Optimus Prime was first released in the Japanese toy line Diaclone in 1983 under the name Battle Convoy, and was imported by Hasbro to become part of the first year of the Transformers toy line in 1984. The figure transformed into a Freightliner semi-trailer truck, the truck's cab converted into Optimus Prime himself, while the trailer opened into the Combat Deck, a battlefield headquarters for the Autobots containing the scout car Roller, used by Prime for spy missions. Prime was one of the very first Transformers characters for whom a profile was written, as part of the original treatment for the franchise assembled by Marvel Comics writers Jim Shooter and Denny O'Neil, the latter being responsible for giving the Autobot leader his name. Optimus, they wrote, had the personality of an Abraham Lincoln, a powerful, kind, intelligent, compassionate commander who believed that freedom was the right of all sentient beings. Optimus Prime was the figurehead of the Transformers brand for its first 2 years, his likeness gracing an incalculable amount of merchandise and media, as he led the Autobots into battle every weekday afternoon in the Transformers animated series, and every month in the pages of the Marvel comic. Each series had its own origin story for Prime that related how he came to be Autobot leader and carrier of the mystic matrix of leadership. In the comic, he was a soldier who rose through the ranks to become leader, but in the cartoon, he came from more humble beginnings. As revealed in the seminal 1985 episode War Dawn, Prime was once a naive young dock worker named Orion Pax, who, during the golden age before the war, idolized the Decepticons for their ability to fly, until he was deceived and gunned down by Megatron at the outbreak of the conflict. Rebuilt by the sage Alpha Trion, he became Optimus Prime, the first of a new generation of battle-ready Autobots who led the fight against the Decepticon war machine. Prime's voice in the animated series was provided by actor Peter Cullen, who based his strong but gentle performance on his own brother, former Marine Larry Cullen.
The way he talked, there was a gentle and a smoothness to it, and he said, "Well, if you're going to be a hero, Peter, be a real hero."
We must have courage, Huffer. We can't ignore the danger. We must conquer it.
Don't be one of those pretend Hollywood heroes. If you're going to be a hero, Peter, remember that. Be strong enough to be gentle.
Hang on to your dreams, Chip. The future is built on dreams. Hang on.
In addition to Cullen's character-defining voice work and the Orion Pax origin story, the cartoon introduced many other concepts that would go on to become some of the most famous recurring pieces of iconography surrounding Optimus Prime in the future, including his Energy Axe weapon, his romance with female Autobot commander Elita 1, and his classic catchphrase,
"Transform and roll out!"
Sadly, Hasbro didn't quite realize what Optimus Prime meant to their audience of children, at the time viewing him as just another toy to be sold, and when that toy was discontinued in 1986, the decision was made to kill Prime off. The cartoon sent him out with style on the big screen that summer, as the Transformers the movie saw him succumb to fatal wounds sustained during his final battle with Megatron, to be replaced as leader by Rodimus Prime. In the comic, meanwhile, he fell victim to his own strong morals, which prevented him from accepting victory in a life-or-death virtual reality video game showdown with the Decepticon leader. Unsurprisingly, the decision to kill off their hero didn't sit well with young audiences, and the appearance in the cartoon of a reanimated zombie version of Prime a few months later was just salt in the wound. A torrent of letters from upset kids soon showed Hasbro the error of their ways, and a two-part episode was quickly commissioned for February 1987 that saw the Autobot leader brought back to life by one of the alien Quintessons. Taking this profound lesson in the popularity and importance of Optimus Prime to heart, Hasbro set to work creating a brand new toy of the Autobot leader for the 1988 product line. A huge, futuristic, heavily armed truck whose cab and trailer could combine to form a super robot. This new Optimus was a Power Master, a kind of transformer who came packaged with a partner minifigure that transformed into an engine for their vehicle mode, which was required to unlock the larger figure's ability to transform. Prime's partner was an alien scientist from the planet Nebulos named High Q. Though the cartoon had come to an end by the time of Power Master Optimus Prime's release, the toy did lead to Prime's resurrection in the Marvel comic, in which it was discovered that Prime's brain had been preserved on a floppy disk after his video game demise, allowing it to be implanted in a new Power Master body constructed by High Q. One further toy of Prime was released by Hasbro in the original series, a non-transforming Action Master figure, which came with a huge truck that converted into a battle station, and Prime adopted this form in the final issue of the Marvel comic, when exposure to the superfuel Nucleon fused him and High Q into a single being. Now, over in Japan, on the other hand, it was a slightly different story. Despite his resurrection in '87, Hasbro's Japanese partner Takara clearly believed that Prime, known in the Japanese market as Convoy, had had his day. Only a few months after his return to life, in the opening episodes of the Japanese exclusive sequel cartoon Transformers: The Headmasters, they immediately killed him off again by having him sacrifice his life bringing the unstable megacomputer Vector Sigma under control. And when they released the Power Master toy in their markets the following year, it was marketed as a new Autobot named Jinrai, who only looked like the departed Optimus. Still, in 1991, with the original series on its last legs, they finally decided to bring Prime back once again as part of that year's Return of Convoy series. Through the life-giving power of the mysterious Zodiac, Prime was reborn as Star Convoy, a motorized figure that converted from futuristic truck to giant robot to a base for the line's tiny Micromasters. In the decades since the end of the original toy line, Optimus Prime has remained the premier legacy character of the Transformers franchise. The very next series, Transformers Generation 2, included 4 separate figures of him between 1993 and 1995, and he's continued to appear in virtually every new incarnation of the brand that's followed, ever present in both media and toy lines with more stories and figures to his name than literally any other Transformers character. His form changes from series to series. He typically turns into various types of semi-truck, both flat-face cab-over and long-hood conventional models, sometimes with a trailer, sometimes without, but several notable iterations of the character have also turned into fire engines, not to mention the other random one-off forms he's had, including sports cars, various types of animal, and more. He's been a headmaster, a pretender, a combiner, and nearly everything else in between. But whatever his shape, he has a consistency of design that virtually no other Transformer can boast. Almost always recognizable by his classic red and blue color scheme, his mouth-plated helmet, or his bodybuilder-style window pecs and grill abs. The only series from which he's notably absent are the Beast-era cartoons of the 1990s, but even then, his role as leader was filled by lookalikes, like his descendant, Optimus Primal, featured in 1996's Beast Wars, which also included a guest appearance for Prime himself when the evil Predacons traveled back in time and attempted to alter history by killing him. Putting it simply, Optimus Prime is both a legend in the fictional world of the Transformers and an icon of 20th and 21st century popular culture, recognizable to kids and adults alike all around the world. Story elements from classic media that commonly recur in new series include explorations of Optimus's civilian life from before he became Prime, with Dreamwave Productions comics introducing in 2002 the enduring idea that he was originally a data clerk, while other stories have depicted him as a scientist, a police officer, and more. And perhaps most famously, his repeated tendency to sacrifice his life and return from the dead, something that almost every version of the character has done at least once. Continuing a trend begun by his Power Master form, it's common for him to combine with his trailer or with other Autobots into new, more powerful forms. And Optimus toys also have a history of being recolored to create new characters, in white as his Autobot brother-in-arms Ultra Magnus, and in black and teal as his evil clone, Nemesis Prime. In terms of characterization, Optimus Prime has always had the same unchanging, noble, compassionate core personality described by Shooter and O'Neill in their original profile, but each series has taken its own unique approach to it. The original cartoon, for instance, initially played Prime as a warm, fatherly figure who joked and bantered in between inspiring speeches.
Amazing. A booby trap that actually catches boobies.
But from the movie onward, the lighter side of the character dropped away, and he became more of a stoic type, always speaking in dramatic intonations.
Yes, Skylynx. And this time, no force in the universe can stop me.
In the Marvel comic, meanwhile, especially under the pen of British writer Simon Furman, he was a wearier leader upon whom the burden of command often weighed heavily, prone to self-doubt and guilt over the suffering caused by the war. Each of these characterizations has been revisited in new media, and as the Transformers franchise has expanded exponentially in the 21st century, each new series has continued to put its own spin on the Autobot leader. Actor Neil Kaplan emulated Peter Cullen's voice for the 2001 Robots in Disguise animated series.
As a matter of fact, I never doubted that for a second, Megatron. Blaze Blaster!
The first Fire Engine version of Optimus, he was conceived in Japan as a separate Autobot named Fire Convoy, but was reimagined as a new incarnation of Prime for Hasbro markets. Optimus Primal actor Gary Chalk voiced Prime in the Unicron trilogy of series, who was forced to question his own worthiness to carry the Matrix while defending the galaxy against the titular monster planet in Transformers Armada, Energon, and Cybertron from 2002 to 2006.
Our worlds are in danger. Transform and roll out!
2007's Transformers Animated saw David Kaye voice a younger Optimus Prime, struggling with his command of a disorderly Autobot space bridge repair crew, who was still trying to prove himself a hero after his rival Sentinel Prime let him take the fall for an unsanctioned mission gone wrong, leading to his expulsion from the Autobot Elite Guard.
Autobots, transform and roll out!
The same year marked the beginning of the live-action film series, which catapulted Optimus Prime back into the pop culture limelight, and saw Peter Cullen return to once again voice the character he had made famous.
My name is Optimus Prime. Sam Witwicky. You hold the key to Earth's survival.
The live-action Optimus was more in the action movie hero vein, a grimmer, more violent character who didn't hesitate to kill Decepticons. Ironically, the kind of tough guy Hollywood hero type that Larry Cullen had encouraged his brother to avoid playing Optimus as over 20 years before. Cullen's return to the role led to him voicing Optimus Prime in the vast majority of new Transformers media released over the next decade. Chiefly, he portrayed the new version of the character featured in the Aligned continuity, a multimedia project of interconnected series and stories that launched in 2010, which combined ideas from throughout Optimus's history to create a definitive modern interpretation of the Autobot leader. In this continuity, Optimus had once been a data clerk named Orion Pax, who was friends with Megatron in the days before the war, when Cybertron was a world of severe social inequality. The pair disagreed over how best to bring equality to their planet. Orion believed the system could be peacefully reformed, but Megatron advocated for violent revolutionary action. Cybertron's High Council was moved by Orion's words of peace and appointed him the next Prime, Optimus Prime, charging him with leading Cybertron into a new future, and prompting the embittered Megatron to turn on his friend and declare war to seize the power he believed Orion had stolen from him. Featured principally in 2010's Transformers Prime animated series, occasionally guest starring in 2011 spin-off Rescue Bots, and eventually stepping down as leader and allowing Bumblebee to take his place in the 2015 sequel Robots in Disguise, the aligned Optimus was the most stoic depiction of the character yet, still kind and compassionate, but a serious commander who let little emotion show, whose every word was a portentous declaration.
If there can be no diplomatic solution to this perpetual conflict, then I must not allow more darkness to fall upon this or any planet.
This Optimus was a truly mythic hero. He was the reincarnation of the last of the original 13 Primes, the epic heroes of Cybertronian legend from its primordial past, and the first true divinely appointed Prime to lead the Autobots since those days of old, with all others before him having been pretenders to the title. These ideas would also be explored in the world of IDW Publishing's comic books, which gave Optimus his own self-titled comic series in 2016, that more deeply explored the ramifications of his supposedly divine heritage, as he struggled under the weight of the sins of the Prime lineage. But comics aren't the only place the aligned story has been echoed. While the details vary between tellings, the basic concept of Optimus as a friend of Megatron's until a dispute over how best to reform Cybertron's corrupt society drove them apart and sparked the war has continued to form the basis for the character's depiction in virtually every new series released since, including 2018's Transformers Cyberverse and 2020's War for Cybertron, which both featured actor Jake Fushi voicing Prime with an emulation of Cullen's gravitas.
Autobots, roll out!
Most recently, 2022's Transformers Earthspark has seen Alan Tudyk take over the role, bringing some long-absent levity back to the character, in a story set after the end of the war, where Optimus and Megatron have at last been able to rekindle their friendship. That brings us up to date on the story of Optimus Prime so far. Now, let's turn to the dark side and look at the history of his greatest foe, the leader of the Decepticons, the great slag maker, Megatron. The toy that would become the original Megatron was first released in the Japanese toy line Microchange in 1983. The figure transformed into a Walther P-38 pistol and was available in 3 colours: grey, black and chromed silver. The silver version came with 3 special accessories: a scope, a stock and a silencer, based on the unique Walther pistol seen in the 1960s TV series The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And it was this version of the figure that was licensed by Hasbro and imported to become part of the first year of the Transformers toy line in 1984. The gun's scope attached to Megatron's arm to become his iconic fusion cannon, and could combine with the other accessories to form various different larger weapons. Marvel Comics writer Bob Budiansky wrote a profile for Megatron that characterized him as a merciless, compassionless warlord who believed that everything was fodder for his ambition to conquer first Cybertron, then the universe. The name Megatron was devised by Budiansky as a portmanteau of megaton, the measurement of the explosive power of a nuclear bomb, and electronic. Hasbro initially thought that the nuclear connotation made the name sound too scary, until Budiansky told them that being scary was the point. Like his eternal enemy Optimus Prime, Megatron was one of the Transformers brand's most prominent figures in its first 2 years. His attempts to plunder the resources of Earth chronicled in media and merchandise of all shapes and sizes, most famous among them the Transformers animated series and Marvel comic book. Infamously though, in some of his earliest appearances, including the first television commercials and the first 2 issues of the comic, he appeared with an alternate character design based on a prototype for the Microchange toy, which was quickly updated to better reflect the finished toy's appearance. In the cartoon, Megatron was brought to life by the rasping performance of actor Frank Welker.
You destroy everything you touch, Megatron!
Because everything I touch is food for my hunger for power!
In addition to the Autobots, the cartoon frequently saw Megatron at odds with his untrustworthy lieutenant, Starscream, who was always scheming to overthrow him as leader. Megatron faced different challenges in the comic. Here, he was actually usurped as leader by Shockwave very early in the series, and spent much of the comic's first 2 years competing with him to regain command. He would also clash with the Autobot medic Ratchet several times over the course of the series. Stories exclusive to the United Kingdom's version of the comic notably showcased Megatron's ability to manipulate antimatter, saw him face further challenges to his power from Straxus, the Decepticon commander back on Cybertron, and fleshed out his origins, revealing that before the war, he had been a gladiator, something that would go on to become a recurring backstory for the character in the 21st century. Megatron's toy was discontinued in 1986, and he was phased out of both the comic and the cartoon, in 2 very different ways. As seen in The Transformers the Movie, Megatron was gravely wounded in his final battle with Optimus Prime, and dumped into space by Starscream to die. There, he was found by the monster planet Unicron, who used his vast cosmic powers to restore and recreate Megatron as Galvatron. In this new form, he would continue to lead the Decepticons through the remainder of the cartoon. Check out the basics on Galvatron to learn more. In the comic, on the other hand, Megatron didn't become Galvatron. Instead, after his and Prime's final battle ended with Optimus's death, Megatron became consumed by the paranoid delusion that the Autobot leader had secretly survived. In the grip of this insanity, he blew up the Decepticons' transdimensional space bridge while he was standing on it, and disappeared in the explosion. He would resurface in the UK comic as part of an epic story in which he teamed up with his own time-traveling future self, Galvatron. But a few years later, when the character returned in the American comic and was revealed to have temporarily been suffering from amnesia after the space bridge explosion, the Megatron who had been appearing in the UK stories was retconned into having only been a clone created by Straxus. Only one further figure of Megatron was released in the original toy line, in 1990, a non-transforming Action Master, which came with the huge Neutro Fusion tank that transformed into a battle station. Though Megatron didn't actually take on this form in the comic, the release of the toy did ensure that he continued to appear in the series in its final year, including a horrifyingly memorable story in which he and recurring enemy Ratchet were temporarily fused together in a teleportation accident. Now, over in Japan, there were a couple of notable differences to Megatron's story. When the Transformers toy line was released there, it was the grey version of the Microchange toy that was sold as Megatron, not the Uncle version, so it lacked the fusion cannon, coming instead with a sword. And while the Action Master wasn't released in Japan at all, Megatron would still return in the 1991 Japanese original storyline, Return of Convoy, when the alien Dark Nova reformatted Galvatron into Super Megatron to fight the reborn Optimus Prime. In the decades since the end of the original series, Megatron has remained one of the Transformers franchise's most significant recurring legacy characters, regularly appearing in new incarnations of the brand with more stories and toys to his name than almost any other character. That said, he's not quite as ubiquitous as Optimus Prime. There have been series in which he's only cameoed, like 1996's Beast Wars, in which he attempted to have his own descendant, a Predacon also named Megatron, alter history by travelling back in time and killing Optimus Prime. Plus several major cartoons in which he hasn't appeared at all. And while Prime has a consistency of design across all his different incarnations that ensures he's always recognisable, Megatron's appearance has been much more changeable. You see, new legislation introduced in America in 1988 had outlawed the manufacture of realistic toy guns for children, meaning that Hasbro had to abandon Megatron's classic pistol mode and start redesigning him with new forms. Beginning with 1993's Transformers Generation 2, for which he was reimagined as a huge green and purple tank, explained by the Marvel comic to be an upgrade provided by the terrorist organization Cobra in a crossover with G.I. Joe. Since then, Megatron has adopted all kinds of different forms across many different series, including tanks, jets and other aircraft, cars and trucks, and more. He was at his most malleable in the 2000s, a time when each successive new version of Megatron bore almost no resemblance to the previous one. But in later years, some consistency would return to the character's look. First, his robot mode went back to being based on his classic Generation 1 design. Then, eventually, in the mid-2010s, a silver and black tank was settled on as his standard alternate mode. But despite his constantly changing appearance, the similarities between Megatron's various incarnations tend to outweigh the differences. He's still the same merciless, power-hungry warrior described in Budiansky's original profile all those years ago. In some stories, he's the founder of the Decepticons, as in the Marvel comic, but in others, he's just their most recent leader, as in the cartoon. But whichever it is, he's always got to contend with Starscream scheming to take the position from him. He's been upgraded into Galvatron multiple times, though these days that's often treated as more of a temporary transformation, which ends with him reverting to normal. Several series have chosen to begin their stories by taking Megatron out of action, so they can build up to his dramatic return, in order to convincingly depict him as a serious threat, rather than the kind of cartoon villain who gets defeated in every episode. Since the late 2000s, it's become common for stories to explore Megatron's pre-war life and his motivations for starting the war in greater depth. One of the earliest and most influential such stories was the 2008 comic book miniseries Megatron Origin from IDW Publishing, which gave him a backstory as a miner who desired to overthrow Cybertron's government due to severe social inequality on the planet. After Generation 2, the first drastically different new incarnation of Megatron was featured in 2001's Robots in Disguise. Able to convert into 5 alternate modes – Dragon, Bat, Dragster, Jet, and Giant Hand – he was originally conceived in Japan as a new character named Gigatron, but was reimagined as a version of Megatron for Hasbro markets. The Megatron of the Unicron trilogy cycled through several forms: a tank in 2002's Transformers Armada, a gunship in 2004's Transformers Energon, and triple-changing dragster and jet forms in 2005's Transformers Cybertron, repeatedly dying and being reborn in these new forms as he strove to control the godlike power of Unicron. 2007 marked the beginning of the live-action film series, featuring a monstrous Megatron who had once, before the war, been brothers in arms with Optimus Prime until he was swayed to the side of evil. This Megatron sported a new mode in every movie, including alien jets and tanks and earthly trucks. The story of the first film in particular, in which Megatron came to Earth in pursuit of the life-giving Allspark, only to be disabled in a crash landing, then found and studied by humans, was a big influence on that year's new television series, Transformers Animated, in which the same thing happened to its version of Megatron. Only this cunning, manipulative incarnation of the villain tricked his discoverer into helping repair him, granting him a new body with a twin-rotor helicopter form. The film series also marked the return of Frank Welker to the role he had originated. Though actor Hugo Weaving portrayed Megatron in the first 3 films,
Give me the Allspark and you may live to be my pet.
Welker performed the character for the tie-in video games, and in 2014 took over the role in the movies themselves.
You turned your back on Cybertron. Now you will watch Earth die.
Welker's return to the role would also lead to him voicing Megatron in 2010's Transformers Prime.
Decepticons, your rightful lord and master has returned.
This show was part of the new Aligned continuity, which aimed to provide a unified, modern vision for Transformers lore that combined elements of many past series. And as such, this Megatron, who sported an alien aircraft alt mode like the movie character, served as Hasbro's definitive interpretation of the Decepticon leader for the new decade. The bot who would become Megatron was originally known only as D-16, until he renamed himself after Megatronus, a fallen hero from Cybertronian legend. Forced to work as a miner as a result of a corrupt caste system that locked Cybertronians into specific jobs and social classes from the moment of their creation, Megatron vowed to tear this unjust regime down so that all Cybertronians could be equal. To spread his message, he took to fighting in underground gladiatorial arenas, earning an army of fellow lower-class followers he dubbed the Decepticons. Megatron's movement caught the attention of idealistic young data clerk Orion Pax, and the two became friends, though they disagreed over the best way to achieve Megatron's goals. Megatron favoured violent revolutionary action, overthrowing the government and taking power, but Orion believed the system could be peacefully reformed. When the pair appeared before Cybertron's High Council to plead their case, the council was moved by Orion's words of peace and appointed him the next Prime, Optimus Prime, charging him with leading Cybertron into a new future. And the embittered Megatron, furious at what he saw as his friend's betrayal of their shared ideals, declared war to seize the power he believed Optimus had stolen from him. The Aligned Continuity's version of Megatron's story has served as the basis for his depiction in virtually all subsequent new series to date, its sympathetic origins for the character opening up the potential to take the Decepticon leader's journey in new and different directions. Transformers Prime itself, for instance, ended with Megatron disbanding the Decepticons after the agony of being possessed by Unicron made him see how he had become the very force of oppression he had begun his crusade to fight against. 2018's Transformers Cyberverse showed Megatron the path his life would have taken without Optimus, when he encountered an irredeemably evil version of himself from a parallel universe, who had killed his world's Optimus before the war had ever begun. 2020's War for Cybertron placed heavy focus on Megatron's tortured relationship with Optimus, and ended with the two old friends achieving an uneasy peace and agreeing to share Cybertron, at least temporarily. The aligned ideas were also adapted back into IDW Publishing's comics, which were able to more deeply explore Megatron's descent into evil from well-intentioned beginnings, and, in 2014, told perhaps the most shocking Megatron story ever, when the aging and weary tyrant, his eyes open to how far he had strayed from his original goals, chose to abandon Decepticonism and change sides to the Autobots, becoming co-captain of the starship Lost Light and travelling the universe on a quest for redemption for his life of misdeeds. IDW's comics would in turn heavily influence the 2022 animated series Transformers Earthspark, which also saw Megatron forsake his evil ways and join Optimus to help bring the war to an end and start building a new future for the Cybertronian race in alliance with humans on Earth. So now that you've heard the full story of the two most important figures in Transformers lore, we're going to turn the clock right back to the beginning and look at the history of Cybertron itself and the origins of the Great War. The Transformers franchise was born during a period of increased tensions in the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The conflict had a significant impact on the culture of the era, including children's cartoons, which now filled the airwaves with stories of democracy-loving heroes defending freedom against evil empires out to conquer the world. And it was this climate that shaped the story of the Transformers from the very start, built around an ages-old war between the forces of good and evil. It was the Decepticons who were responsible for beginning the war, and the reasons the original series gave them for doing so were straightforward. They did it because they craved power, wanting to conquer first Cybertron, then the rest of the galaxy, forcing the Autobots to take up arms to stop them. In the years since, different Transformers series have taken different approaches to certain aspects of the war, such as how it started or what it's being fought over, but this simple premise of good versus evil, of the Decepticons being motivated by the pursuit of power, has remained consistent for most of the brand's history. It's only since the beginning of the 2010s that their motives and the origins of the war have begun to be explored in a more nuanced way. In the 1980s, the history of Cybertron before the war was told in two different ways by the Transformers animated series and the Marvel comic book. In the comic, life on Cybertron began when the God of Light, Primus, who dwelled at the heart of the planet, created the Transformers out of the metal substance of the world, intending them to protect the universe against his ancient enemy, the Dark God, Unicron. The prose story, State Games, published in the United Kingdom in 1986, detailed how the Transformers lived in peace and prosperity for eons, ruled over by a line of Autobot overlords. But as the population grew and fuel became scarcer, the overlords' rule weakened, and the planet split into a collection of independent city-states, vying for control of Cybertron's resources. Eventually, the cities of Voss and Tarn went to war and wiped each other out, a brief conflict that resulted in the death of the last of the overlords and left the Autobot city of Iacon as the largest power on the planet. Peace reigned again for a time, but in secret, a power-hungry gladiator from Tarn named Megatron united the survivors of Voss and Tarn under his leadership, by blaming Iacon for not stepping in to stop the conflict. Dubbing his new followers the Decepticons, Megatron declared war against the Autobots, intending to conquer Cybertron and turn it into a huge cosmic battleship with which to attack and enslave other planets. The war went poorly at first, until the ruling council of Iacon turned over command of their armies to a brave soldier named Optimus Prime, who proved able to effectively organize the Autobots to fight back. Later issues of the comic suggested that the difference between Autobot and Decepticon wasn't just an ideological one, but that there was some fundamental genetic difference between the two factions that made each the other's natural opposite. Two halves of a cosmic whole, each existing to balance the other. One good, one evil, which made war between the two inevitable. This idea of the war being the unavoidable result of genetic determinism was also featured in the Transformers cartoon. Here, the Transformer race was created by the evil aliens, the Quintessons, who used Cybertron as a factory world to build them. Initially, the robots were forced to serve the Quintessons as slaves, but eventually they rose up in revolt and forced their cruel masters off the planet. Now free, the Autobots, having been created by the Quintessons as consumer goods, went on to build a peaceful society dedicated to the arts and culture. But the Decepticons were inherently warlike and power-hungry due to having been built by the Quintessons to serve as military hardware, and they attempted to take over the planet. In this universe, there were multiple Autobot-Decepticon wars down through history rather than a single unbroken one. After years of such fighting, the Autobots were able to defeat the Decepticons by inventing transforming technology and brought a golden age of peace to the planet. Until the creation of Megatron, who reorganized the defeated Decepticons and began the conflict the cartoon would name the Great War. In response, Autobot Elder Alpha Trion rebuilt the young Autobot Orion Pax into Optimus Prime to lead the fight against Megatron's army. But eventually, after millions of years of combat, Cybertron became drained of energy, forcing the Transformers to leave their dying homeworld. This last concept has remained a staple of Transformers storytelling in the 21st century, but not every idea about the war from classic media has carried over into newer series. For example, the original comic and cartoon depicted the Autobots as being on the losing end of the war, with the Decepticons in control of much of Cybertron. And while some modern series have followed that formula, others have chosen to present the two armies as being on roughly equal footing on their home world. And while the action of the cartoon was driven by the broad objective of finding new sources of energy to revitalize Cybertron, in other series, the war has often been fought over a very specific source of power, such as the energy-boosting Minicons, or most famously, the Allspark, the source of Transformer life, introduced by the live-action movies and featured in several TV series. Where Optimus Prime and Megatron had previously been depicted as simply rival commanders who rose to power around the same time, a key new idea introduced by the movies was that the two leaders had once been allies, and that their falling out had been part of the inciting incident that began the war, with tie-in media detailing how the pair used to be the rulers of Cybertron during its pre-war golden age, until the ambitious Megatron turned on his brother, seeking to rule the planet alone. But perhaps the story that has most significantly influenced the modern depiction of the war was IDW Publishing's 2008 comic book miniseries Megatron Origin, which revisited Marvel's vision of Megatron as a gladiator who amassed an army of followers, and introduced the idea that before the war, Cybertron had been a world of severe social inequality, ruled over by a corrupt Senate. Megatron had been a miner labouring under this system, and he united his fellow downtrodden working-class bots to violently tear down this broken social order and seize power for himself. Behind the scenes, Hasbro spent the latter half of the 2000s internally developing a story about the earliest days of life on Cybertron, centered on the very first Transformers, the legendary 13 Primes. This story would eventually grow to form the basis of the Aligned continuity, which, as part of its effort to create a unified modern vision for the franchise and its lore, brought together ideas from all across Transformers history to craft the most detailed account of Cybertron's history to date. As recounted in full in the 2013 guidebook, The Covenant of Primus, the Aligned story of life on Cybertron began when Primus created the 13 Primes to aid him in his battle against Unicron. These legendary heroes defeated the Dark God, then watched over Cybertron until the day that one of their number, Megatronus, killed another, Solus Prime, in a fit of passion. Realizing that they weren't the flawless demigods they had believed themselves to be, the 13 decided to sire a new generation of Cybertronians to take their place. Together, they brought online the Well of All Sparks, a huge pit that reached to the center of the planet, where lay the Allspark of Primus, the conduit for the god's life-giving power. out of which all subsequent Transformer life emerged. Known in Cybertronian history as the Age of Evolution, this period saw the Primes shepherd these new life forms through the early stages of civilization. But the race's development was set back when the gravity of a passing sun threw Cybertron into chaos, triggering an extinction event called the Great Cataclysm that wiped out much life on the planet. After the Cataclysm, a new era known as the Age of Origins began, in which the survivors of the disaster banded together into a collection of primitive barbarian tribes, which then gradually gathered together to form settlements, the largest of which would eventually become the planet's capital, Iacon. During this age, Cybertron was visited by the Quintessons, who tricked the primitive Cybertronians into welcoming them in by claiming to be benevolent beings come to advance the Cybertronian race, when secretly they really intended to use the Transformers to build space bridges for them and then sell them into slavery across the galaxy. Under the Quintessons' guidance, Cybertron underwent rapid technological advancement, quickly evolving from a primitive feudal culture into a unified society, governed by a high council and organized into a caste system that assigned Transformers specific jobs based on what they transformed into. Eventually, however, the Transformers discovered the Quintessons' evil intentions and turned on them, expelling them from Cybertron. The era of Quintesson rule became known as the Age of Wrath, but its end marked the beginning of the Golden Age, as the Transformers used what they'd learned from the aliens to grow and flourish as a species, even using the space bridges to establish colonies on other planets. But after 8,000 years, the Golden Age came to a terrible end when a deadly plague of rust began spreading across the colonies. To prevent the disease from reaching Cybertron, the Transformers were forced to destroy the space bridges, leaving their homeworld cut off from the rest of the galaxy. In this new era, known as the Age of Rust, institutional rot soon set in. As the planet fell back on the old systems of governance out of a need for stability and security, the caste system degenerated into total inequality, with bots forced into lives and positions on the social hierarchy from birth that they couldn't change. Miner and Gladiator Megatron wanted to see this regime abolished so that all Cybertronians could be equal, and he soon attracted a legion of fellow lower caste supporters. His movement also caught the attention of idealistic young data clerk Orion Pax, who became close friends with Megatron, though the pair disagreed over the best way to achieve Megatron's goals. Orion believed that the system could be peacefully reformed, but Megatron favoured violent revolutionary action and was already secretly directing his followers to carry it out. When the pair were granted an audience with the High Council to have their say, the Council were moved by Orion's words of peace, and appointed him the next Prime, Optimus Prime, charging him with leading Cybertron into the future. Furious at what he saw as his friend's betrayal of their shared ideals, Megatron cut off all ties with Optimus, and with his followers, began the war to take the power he believed Optimus had stolen from him. Megatron's war would ultimately ravage Cybertron and result in the Allspark being lost to the stars, forcing the Transformers to abandon their dying planet. As has become common with much of the lore laid down by the Aligned Continuity, this version of Cybertron's history and the outbreak of the war has gone on to become the definitive modern interpretation of the concept. And in the same way that Peter Parker will always be bitten by a spider, or that Bruce Wayne's parents will always be shot in an alley, the broad strokes of this story, the tale of the 13 Primes, of a golden age in which Cybertron had colonies on planets across the galaxy, of a corrupt system rife with inequality that Megatron began a war to tear down, putting him at odds with his former friend Optimus Prime, culminating in a Cybertron left dying that the Transformers were forced to abandon, have served as the inspiration for the backstory of essentially every major new Transformers series released since, each one depicting their own unique version of the story by putting their own spin on the basic events. Plus, the concepts would even feed back into both the movie universe and IDW's comics, which continued to more deeply explore the fascist politics behind the caste system, and to draw greater parallels between the rise of the Decepticons and the real-life workers' uprising that led to the founding of the Soviet Union, in a sense bringing the Great War full circle back to its Cold War origins. But as important as the war is to the story of the Transformers franchise, both the Autobots and the Decepticons fight in the hope that one day it'll end. Now, neither the original cartoon nor the comic was ever able to show the end of the war. At times, the Autobots seemed to achieve peace, even retaking Cybertron, but these were only temporary lulls, as the Decepticons would inevitably return and the war would rage on. The cartoons of the 21st century have been a bit more lucky in this regard, with several, like Transformers Cybertron, Prime, and Cyberverse, being able to bring their versions of the Great War to an end in their series finales. There have even been series set entirely after the war, including Beast Wars, Transformers Animated, and Prime's 2015 sequel, Robots in Disguise, which take place in future eras where the Autobots have restored peace to Cybertron. Rather than full-scale war, these series featured only small teams of heroes fighting on other planets to stop rogue bands of villains from obtaining the power and resources they needed to launch a new attack on Cybertron. The most recent cartoon to explore the post-war era has been 2022's Transformers Earthspark, which starred a new generation of Transformers created on Earth, who had to grapple with the legacy of violence they had inherited from their forebears, and navigate the ages-old hatreds and prejudices born from millions of years of war to establish their own identities in this new age. One of the most in-depth looks at the end of the war and life during peacetime was provided by IDW's comics, which brought the war to an end in 2011 and spent the next 7 years of comics chronicling the challenges the Autobots and Decepticons faced as they tried to build a new future for their world together. From the political struggles of building a new government and re-establishing contact with Cybertron's long-lost colonies, to facing attacks from other races seeking retribution for the pain the Transformers War brought to the universe. This was followed by a reboot of the comics, introducing a new universe that wound the story back to before the start of the war, to tell another new version of the conflict's beginning and the story of Optimus and Megatron's tragic friendship, this time depicting the pair as senators on opposite sides of a political disagreement over freedoms the imperialist Megatron believed were being denied him and his kind, which led him to stage a coup to seize control of the planet's government. And now, Transformers 1 is ready to offer its own take on the legend, with actors Chris Hemsworth and Brian Tyree Henry stepping into the roles of Orion Pax and D-16 for the latest reimagining of the story of how these two bots became Optimus Prime and Megatron, and the fight to bring justice to their world that ultimately doomed their brotherhood. And those are the basics on Optimus Prime, Megatron, and the history of Cybertron and its war. Stay tuned for more Transformers 1 tie-in episodes and updates coming in the future, as we wait to see if maybe this movie's version of the events will become the new definitive telling of the tale for the next decade. But for now, share your thoughts on the film in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to check out my channel for nearly 250 more like it, covering all kinds of history and lore from the world of the Transformers.